And it's our money.
It's our money. Fulton and DeKalb County. So I hope the leadership in the caucus and in the Democratic caucus, the Black caucus, will understand that whether it's a special session or regular session, we're going to have to give up something to get that MARTA bill.
Let me bring to the stage 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, co-founder of Newsmakers Live and the Newsmakers Journal, my partner and friend, Mr. Maynard Eaton.
You were here when all of this started, when one of the original members of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, or you hear some, but now you're fighting as much outside as you are inside the legislature. You're doing something, you've been an ongoing matter of a lynching, if you will. Could you
well, you know, when you met me, I was at SCLC. You came out of Florida to work for Channel 11 after Reverend Joe Boone and Hosea Williams had picketed the station and demanded that African Americans be hired. And I was at SCLC working for Dr. Ralph Abernathy. And, of course, we had developed a partnership with a community called Monroe, Georgia, Walton County. Dr. King had a case on his agenda the night he was assassinated in Memphis on April 4th, 1968. The case is the Moores Ford Bridge lynching. The last time I saw Dr. King alive was on March 21st, 1968 at New Zion Baptist Church in Macon, Georgia. Willie Bolin, Bobby Howard, Jimmy Wells, Leon Hall, and many others were in that room. And Mr. Dan Young, who had buried those victims who were lynched at the Moores Ford Bridge in Monroe, he said to Dr. King, he said, Martin, when you and Ralph finish in Memphis helping those sanitation workers, we need you in Monroe, Georgia. Dr. King made a commitment to come. The night that he was assassinated, he was scheduled to fly to Memphis, land on a private plane in Monroe, and begin to develop a movement around the lynchings at the Moores Ford. But we're still working that case now.
But briefly, not to be cynical, but briefly, why do we really care now? Who will go to jail? Some 90-year-old guy?
Oh, absolutely.
But I mean,
the FBI and the GBI is over there right now, and they are pursuing leads.
Does it really matter to us, you think?
Oh, absolutely. Justice is denied is justice delayed. But let me tell you, right now, the International War Crimes Commission, the International Criminal Court in The Hague are rounding up old Nazis as we meet here tonight at 201 Cortlandt. Old Nazis who committed, crimes against Jews, Holocaust, all across Europe. They're finding them. They found one in Lawrenceville, Georgia, a year ago. His name was Paul Hens, 85 years old. They said his crimes were committed in 1943. They deported him back to Germany. John Jim Daniel up in Michigan that they just pulled out of a nursing home last night.
So you're saying it's
trying
still
to deport him back. So listen, there are a whole lot of killers who are still living who committed heinous crimes against African Americans, and we think they deserve to be prosecuted. The FBI is there. The GBI is there. President George Bush signed the Emmett Till bill into law October 7 of last year so that all of these old cases preceding 1970 could be reinvestigated and prosecuted. So that's one of our major ongoing movements that Dr. King had on his agenda in 1968.
So let's talk about from Dr. King and protest, civil rights movement to a protest you'll put on under the Gold Dome this season. Marching out because of an Obama protest, because the president could not be included in the Legislative Black Caucus. Am I saying that correctly? Is that what the protest was, over President Obama? And if so, why?
It happened on the House side.
The walkout, right?
And basically, what it was a demonstration against a policy that's been in place for years, that you have local legislation and you have privilege resolutions that pretty much they've always gone through. They've never been challenged. And on this particular occasion, they chose to challenge it. We honor everybody.
They didn't want
to honor Barack Obama. They did not want to allow Barack Obama to be an honorary member of the Legislative Black Caucus, and it made no sense. And so it was a protest, and we walked out. But the reality is that it made no sense for them to not allow that piece of legislation to go through.
And if I can just kind of set the stage for the walkout of the House, I introduced a similar resolution a month prior to the walkout. Senate. So for the House to take the action they did to pull this bill off of the privilege resolution calendar, the consent calendar, and to vote on it individually, and then to have the members in the chamber reject the bill was an absolute insult to all of the African Americans serving over there in the House of Representatives. So it was much more than just a walkout. It was a protest.
It was a protest against the way blacks are treated there, or a protest. Did it mean anything to folk? I mean, it's a symbolism over substance, some might say.
Well, it may be symbolic to some, but for those of us that served there,
Right.
for those of us that were born in this red clay of Georgia, and those of us that have witnessed the civil rights movement birth in Atlanta, it was much more than just symbolic.
Talk a bit while you have the mic. Talk a bit about the Black Caucus, if you will. It's been criticized in the past by some, maligned by others, applauded by some. You in the first term. What are your grades of this? You promised some reform. You said things are going to be different earlier when the session began. What's the state of the state with regard to the Black Caucus?
Well, when I offered myself up to service to the Black Caucus, one of the things that I said that we were going to do is sit and really get our house in order internally. And then we're going to get back to our true mission. And our mission as the Black Caucus is representing the interests of African Americans in the state of Georgia. And then we're going to be their advocates underneath the Gold Dome. And I think after this first year, we've been true to our mission. We have a much better organization, a much stronger caucus. And in terms of being financial, it certainly is a much stronger caucus because it's good to say that we have money and resources and the funds are flowing again.
Was the caucus able to get some of that money, that $35 billion, swirl into the black folks?
Unfortunately, as a caucus, we work within our delegations. We also work within the General Assembly on the appropriation of those funds. And our causes, I'm sure we would like to see much more causes, and I'm sure my colleagues over here would agree with you in terms of how those funds were spent, but we're only limited, and we are limited by our numbers.
Let me ask you, Representative Bruce. There are those who suggest, as we well know, that the Gold Dome was controlled by Republicans. Wouldn't it make political sense then to try and get along, to walk across that aisle? I have not sensed that many black legislators do much working with Republicans.
Well, it takes two to tango, as they say. And quite frankly, I think all of us, have made our efforts to try to work with the Republican majority. And it's a difference between, we're all going to draw our line as to what we will or will not do. And quite frankly, we have gone to the Republican leadership on a number of issues, MARTA being one of the largest ones that I've been working on this session. Just prior to coming here, I spent 4 hours on the radio.
Oh, we're going to get to you about MARTA now. I'm a MARTA writer. I want to know about MARTA.
Talking about, MARTA. But the reality is that they are playing a game of political hardball, and it's right now they have the numbers. They have 107 of the 180 members, and they don't need to bargain with us on most issues. The only thing that the only leverage, because of our numbers that we have, is when they are trying to change a constitutional amendment of some sort, which requires 120 votes, and they don't have that. And that appears to be the only time that they're interested in talking to us. The rest of the time, they don't need to.
Representative Brooks, you've been there a long time. You were there when Democrats were in power.
29 years.
And you've seen that power diminish to almost naught. But your mentor, Hosea Williams, was an independent who worked, even voted for Republicans.
Yeah, that's correct. Listen, when I got elected in 1980, I came in 1981, and every proposal, every resolution that I had to sponsor, I went to Johnny Isaacson, that you knew. I went to Dorothy Felton, that you knew. And I went to Bob Irvin, that you knew. Right. And I said, listen, even though Democrats are in control, I want Republicans on my bills and resolutions. And they always signed them. That's my spirit today. Even though when I introduce something today, I get Democrats to take the lead, like Calvin Smyer, Dubose Porter, Carolyn Hugel, and others. But I also go over to Jerry Keene and Mark Burkhalter and Larry O'Neill, because I know in order to get anything done, you've got to have bipartisan support. Democrats don't have the numbers right now. But that's been my philosophy. I just believe that that's the way you ought to do it. Sometimes it's a little more difficult depending on the issue. But I think going forward, as Democrats continue to come back, you'll see more deals cut between Democrats and Republicans, like President Obama. I mean, he knows he's got to have Republican support, even though the Democrats control Congress. In order for him to craft his agenda, whatever it may be, he's got to have Republican support.
Senator, as a businessman, in your dealership, it seems like you have to get along with white counterparts very well to be successful. Are you doing it in the Senate? Are you doing it as a chairman as well? I mean, you don't sell them cars to just black folks only.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Money knows no colors, only green. And I agree with my colleagues. And every attempt every opportunity that we have, we're always trying to reach across the aisle. And there are a lot of issues that are issues that's going to be supported by both Democrats and Republicans. There's only those divisive issues where I find, particularly in the Senate, there's 56 members in the Senate, 34 Republicans, and 22 of us are Democrats, where you find those wedge issues where the caucus gets locked down. And those are the ones that just happen to make all of the media attention, by the way.
Are we just obsolete in the process then? Are we a non-factor in the process? I mean, that's got to be awfully frustrating that if you can't get anything done.
There are so many ways to get things done in the General Assembly. I've had bills that I couldn't get out of committee, but I've taken those bills and offered them as amendments on the floor, bypassing the process, and I've been able, and quite successful at doing that, by the way. So there's so many other ways that we as legislators have opportunities to be successful and to get our...
Now, I'm going to ask you, Senator Vincent Ford told me Friday at the opening game, he said, listen, some of my colleagues have different ways of legislating, but I make sure I get something out of that budget. Now, is he the guy that's got, I mean, he says he gets money out of the budget. I don't know how he does it, but is that something that's...
Well, there are ways to work with the leaders of the appropriations committees in the House and the Senate, and those ways and means leaders. And from time to time, you can find common ground. And away from the media, away from the headline and the cameras, you can craft some legislation and cut deals. Sometimes they need us on constitutional amendments. But I was just thinking, since Sonny Perdue has been in office, he's had to sign 3 of my bills. And my secretary one day said, you got to go over there and he's going to sign your bill. You got to stand next to him. And if you don't want to stand next to him, stop passing bills. But we just passed a bill with Roger's help in the House and other caucus members. We passed House Bill 493. It's in the Senate on their calendar right now. It died. You saw me talking to Don Balfour the night of when we signed it. Died.
I want to ask you
but
about
that. That's a $207 million project.
You almost look like you're almost near tears.
Balfour was waving to Casey Cagle, Tyrone's bill, bring it up, bring it up. And Casey, he was calling senators to get their conference committee reports back to the House.
Was that to spank you, or was that
well,
personal?
I voted against the budget twice.
Okay.
I voted against the governor's Senate Bill 200. And so I think they probably said, well, you know what, we're going to teach him. We're going to hold his bill up to the special session or the next session, but we got the bill out of the House with only 2 dissenting votes, and that's a $207 million bill. What it does is it authorizes the creation of the Youth Conservation Corps to take advantage of the energy conservation programs, weatherization programs, in the stimulus program that President Obama sent us, $207 million to employ youth and give them real jobs and career training programs that will go on as long as he's in the White House. So this bill is going to be there, and the senators will probably send it back to us during the special session or the regular session. But that's just an indication of bipartisan support, because I got all the Republican leadership in the House and the Democratic leadership. It got over to the Senate, and Tommy Williams said to me, we're going to pass your bill. We're going to pass. Well, Casey didn't call it.
It's also an example of power politics, too, isn't it? Power politics. Speaking of power politics, MARTA, how do you not let them, I mean, come on, man. How do you not let them get money for MARTA? Chairman of Fort County, this is the most important thing in MARTA, folk like me.
What's very interesting to me is that the state contributes 0 to MARTA. And, not a penny. And, for the state to have control over the assets that MARTA has is absolutely amazing to me. But the truth of that bill
almost sounds like slavery.
Well, in a way it is, but I was approached, as you know, by the majority leader who came and he said, I will allow this bill to go full throttle and pass and go where it needs to go. If, and I knew it was going to be an if you will support House Resolution 1. And, Tyrone, mentioned a moment ago that there are bills that you just cannot support. That bill would have pretty much gutted school systems. It would have hurt, cities and counties. It would put us in a position of not being able to fund. And really all it was going to do was shift the burden from the state to the local areas. And so it was nothing.
It was that bad a bill.
It was a terrible, terrible bill. You heard
so much. So bad.
Let me. You early on, it was the speaker's great plan. Remember that?
Yeah.
Well, this was the speaker's not so great plan, and we just couldn't support it.
Then what's the rationale? Now you passed in the Senate, right? And which would have done what? Would you explain it for us?
You mean
Senate Bill 20, is that it?
No, it's SR1.
No, he's talking about 120. He's talking about 120.
the martyr?
Martyr bill.
But that bill absolutely passed over in the Senate, and I have to give my props to Senator Kasim Reed, who did an outstanding job on representing the interests of Atlanta and getting this bill through the Senate. And we thought clearly at the Senate that once we got out, the bill was going to clearly come through.
And it would have done what, sir? Explain.
Well, the bill, there's two funding mechanisms for MARTA. MARTA is funded off the 1 cent sales tax in Atlanta, Fulton, DeKalb County. And there's two pots of money set up. One is for capitalization, the other is for operations. And right now, the operations account at MARTA is significantly depleted, lower. The capitalization fund for MARTA has over $65 million in it.
$5 million is sitting there.
That's correct. And under state law, they can't use any of those funds over in the capitalization account. And MARTA doesn't plan on building any new rail lines anytime soon, by the way. But they can't use any of those funds without state approval. And that's what this resolution would have done. That's what this bill would have done.
That to me, to the general public, seems like nothing but vicious, racially toned politics. You've been down there a long time. Give me a sense of, how do you make sense of this?
Well,
and how should your citizens take this?
Well, let me tell you something. I learned a long time ago, in politics, you got to cut deals to get things done. You got to give a little to get a little.
It's called quid pro quo.
I think in order for us to move the MARTA bill, Senate Bill 120, we're going to have to do something on SR1. Now, whether we like it or not, they're not going to give us the MARTA bill until we give them something. They have the votes to stop us. It's very important that MARTA remains solvent and MARTA can get that $65 million that's in the bank that they can't spend because we won't pass Senate Bill.
And it's our money.
It's our money. Fulton and DeKalb County. So I hope the leadership in the caucus and in the Democratic caucus, the Black caucus will understand that whether it's a special session or regular session, we're going to have to give up something to get that MARTA bill. I don't know what, but let me just tell you this. Dr. Joe Lyra just called me. He's up the street at the Peachtree Plaza. I have to present him an award at the MALDEF convention. So I'm going to cut out and let my colleagues carry on.
Well, thank you for coming.
We'll have Dr. Lyra over in Monroe, where you and Mark Taylor came a couple of years ago for the reenactment of the lynchings at the Boysville Breed on July 25th. But I'm honored to be with you.
Tell Dr. Lyra he's due here in May.
In May? Okay, I'll tell him in a few minutes. I'm going to walk out. But my colleagues can handle it while I go out.
Speaking about MARTA, again, the Fulton County delegation, that had a cut to your core.
It cut straight to the core because it's something, my constituents ride MARTA.
Right.
And
I'm one of them.
Yeah. And, so it's important to me that we keep it going. Now, I am planning to have some meetings with Jerry Keene and some others over the break. And with the hope that we can come to some kind of a conclusion around this. But
Jerry Keene
is the majority leader, and he is the one.
He's the one that spanked you and said,
well,
no.
I won't allow myself to be spanked. Okay, so we're not going to go there. And like I said, the spanking would have been if I'd have fell for it.
I got you.
Okay.
It was really that bad. A quid pro
It was
quo.
a terrible bill, and you have to make decisions. And the decision was that we were not going to sacrifice the residents of this state. Because of this. And we are working with other measures. Fortunately, the ARC, as you know, came through with some money that we hope will help MARTA through this crisis.
But that's a one-time.
But all of this was one time. The reality is that we have to do what we have to do with what we have available.
Let's throw with two of us in there. Let's throw some quick subjects. Education. I mean, we honor Barbara Hall, but 50% of black males are still dropping out of school. I just don't get it. I mean, she runs a school system that's virtually defunct. But I'm saying, any education bills, any education monies, anything on education that's going to help out you? Because you talk about dropouts a lot. I've heard you talk about that a lot.
And we both are committed to education. I don't know if you are aware, the bill that I've been working on for a while, the Parent Protection Act, which was conceived by some 10-year-old kids. I was speaking over at A. Philip Randolph Elementary School about how bills get passed. And at that time, I was the Democrats were in charge, so I really did know how a bill got passed. We're still trying to figure that out now. But the bill was to allow their parents to be able to come to the school without their jobs being put at risk. And these kids, we worked with them, And what happened, the bill passed out of the House. It got over to the Senate. When it got to the Senate, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce got wind of that bill. And they fought those kids over on the Senate side because of the program called, or a doctrine of employment at will, that says that they want to be able to fire people for any reason or no reason. And
the Chamber of Commerce is kind of running the school system.
But they're saying one thing, you know, in one breath they're saying that parental involvement is essential, but in the other breath they're saying not at the expense of business.
So while we're talking about education, let me just kind of add that if you look at some of the current legislation that's been circulated underneath the Gold Dome, clearly our governor has not had any kind of plan to improve education in the state of Georgia. Let's not talk about what's going on here in Atlanta. Let's talk about education throughout the state of Georgia. Most of the bills that we've seen have been aimed at trying to find a way, some kind of backdoor somewhere to get some kind of voucher system in Georgia that would allow public school students to take those funds to go to any of these little small private church schools that's popping up all over the place, all out in suburbs and rural areas. And that's been a contentious fight my entire time that I've served down in the General Assembly.
Senator, let's talk about business. To me, I cringe over this. And you have a young man in the audience, Chuck, who's really up on this subject. Mm-hmm. The lottery. We spend, black folks who feed the lottery like pigs to a trough, you know. But by the same token, we're not getting much for it. And few, if any, black folks have business with the lottery. You're going to have some hearings about that, I understand.
That's correct. And that came out of one of our subcommittee hearings at our Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. When that issue, and it's not just the lottery. When you look at DOE, Department of Education, when you look at DOT, when you look at the level of funding for minorities working with the state. Now, I'm a businessman. Yeah. I don't know the last time I sold a vehicle to the state of Georgia. Wow. But when you look at these issues out there, is no doubt in anyone's mind that systematically we've been removed from any kind of purchasing power or ability to gain any kind of access to those purchasing dollars at the state level. And that's why we're going to hold hearings regarding the lottery, particularly for that very reason you just mentioned, that we fund a lot of those lottery proceeds.
Speaking of business, now, and we hear a lot of talk about blacks shouldn't be Democrats, all of that. We should be in both parties. Are the black Republicans getting anything out of the Republican-controlled government?
Nothing I'm aware of either.
And they don't associate with us. I mean, they don't come to the Black Caucus meetings, and if we invite them, it's no, to keep the distance. But, you're talking about the lottery, but I also introduced a bill, if you remember, to try to allow local governments, cities and counties, to be able to have referendums within their boundaries about casinos. And, again, this is not being an advocate for or against casinos as much as it is an advocate for some new alternatives to how we fund government.
Well, we talked about that last week right here
Okay.
with Dan O'Leary and Rob Pitts. And the point is, seemingly, the lottery itself, as it now played, is almost running out of ideas and money. And it's going to have something to revive it.
And we have, right now, property tax and sales tax are pretty much how we fund everything in state government, and we have taxed people to the limit, and so we have to come up with creative ways to come up with resources. And it seems to me that for those that don't want to see a casino that in their community, then they would vote against it in their community. But those communities that don't have an issue with it, let it go and let it move forward. And you see buses every Friday night. Just about every grocery store next to a highway, has cars there over the whole weekend, where people have packed up and gone to Alabama and Florida and other places so that they can participate in the gaming. And that's all this revenue that's leaving the state, and we need to stop and do something different. And this thing about the religious piece of it, some of those are church buses going too. So.
I'll be on business. Even your white colleagues lament the fact, white business colleagues lament the fact, nothing done about transportation. I mean, not just MARTA, but transportation, the ease the congestion and across the state, or transportation funding. That has to be. White folks even mad at you guys.
Well, let's just kind of sum it all up. This past session this year, for me, was certainly the worst I've ever participated in.
Okay.
And for us to leave the Gold Dome without passing some kind of funding for transportation is truly an insult to all of Georgians, particularly those that live here in the metropolitan area, where we simply wanted to have the ability to impose a regional tax so that we can make some significant improvements in transportation within the Atlanta metropolitan region. And when I look at what we passed as it relates to transportation, was all what the governor was pushing. The governor was just bent on his transportation governance bill, and he was so determined to get that governance bill done, and that's the only bill that passed, and the only thing that bill would do is just rearrange the deck of the chairs on the Titanic.
That's right. In other words, the governor now has all the power, the governor and the Speaker of the House have all the power to name who's on to control the dollars.
That's pretty much the case. But, we have to, again, be for real. Let's call it the way it is. When you were here, and I was here too, when MARTA came into existence. I think you were here. Yes. And, it came into existence, and the name of it is the Metro Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. The bill was put in place with the intent of all of the counties in the metro area supporting it. And that didn't happen. And it didn't happen because they did not want black people to have access to other parts of the metro area, easy access, and they blocked it.
Because it was called moving Africans rapidly through Atlanta.
Well, yeah, and if you think about the grocery, the shopping area up there, Lenox Square. Right. When we first came here, they started remodeling Lenox Square, if you remember. And when they got it looking really nice and they had all these fancy stores in there, and they were ready to do business, MARTA didn't go out there. And they could not get enough people to work for that minimum wage. You remember that?
That's true.
And what happened, there was a big cry from the merchants up there that we have to have a way to bring people from the south side who will accept minimum wage to work up in this mall. And that's how MARTA got up there. And, it's a racial issue. Nobody wants to say that. But that's what it is.
And still is.
And still is. So we have to say it. Because, I really firmly believe if you don't say what the problem is, you're not going to solve the problem. And if we keep dancing around it and coming up with all of these other reasons why we think things are not working.
What do your colleagues say? What are your colleagues? Listen, you work with big business all the time. You danced with the president a couple times this year, didn't you?
Absolutely.
What do your colleagues say about race? Do you ever confront it? Do you ever say, I meant at the meeting. At the meeting. We'll talk about that in a minute. But does racism come up in your proceedings? In the higher chamber? The snorty chamber?
You can't ever get away from it. It's always there lurking somewhere in the background, even if it's not on the forefront. Okay. But there's much more important issues that surface as it pertains to business. Because businesses have to have a viable labor pool. Businesses have to have a viable economic model out there. They got to have people that's going to purchase their products and services. So there's a lot more important issues other than just the race issue as it pertains to businesses.
As a businessman, do the proceedings or even this work session impact you and others like you? The stuff you do impacts business, does it not?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And in terms of supporting businesses in Georgia, I would have to grade this General Assembly with an F. We had our President Barack Obama, who stood strong up in Congress and pushed through an economic stimulus package. I don't remember any talk from anyone in leadership in Georgia about a stimulus package for the state of Georgia. As a matter of fact, that governor even hinted at the fact that he was not going to accept the money. There's a lot more that we could have done in the state of Georgia to promote businesses. We had plant closings. We have high foreclosures. We had the carpet industry up in Dalton closing mills. We had the poultry plants down in South Georgia closing. When you look at what was happening in Georgia, and there was no talk whatsoever by the governor, the lieutenant governor, in terms of initiatives that we could have taken to help save some of these industries in the state of Georgia.
Do you think the voters are going to allow them to get away with this? People are not that stupid. There was not much done. And I'm sure you'll be out on the hustings telling voters that.
Oh, absolutely, and we are. I certainly hope not. I'm one of the voters that's not going to allow them to get away with it. And everyone in the sound of my voice, I'm encouraged to do the same.
The other thing, too, I hear people say nothing got done, but a lot did get done. And when I say there's two sides to what goes on in the legislature. Bills get passed, but they get defeated, too. Right. And we defeated some pretty bad bills. And H.R. 1 is an example of that. So I would not characterize it as nothing getting done. If you characterize it, as I said, as what got passed, a lot of things did not get passed. But some of those things we didn't want to get passed.
And we still didn't get nothing out of the budget, though. That's the...
Well, and as I said, you know, the voting, the number of people who you have in each party is going to determine where that money goes. Speaking
of, I'm going to end it on this note, gentlemen. Your thoughts, respectively, on this gubernatorial race, Democrats and Republicans. What's your thinking? I mean, with Cagle dropping out, the Lieutenant Governor Cagle dropping out, what do you see in the tea leaves politically?
Well, I don't want to jump the gun, but we're going to have a meeting on Friday to discuss that very issue, and tomorrow actually, and to discuss that issue to see, you know, what strategically we can and should do as African Americans who happen to also be legislators, to see what we can do in regards to making that race have the outcome that we want. There are several people that have already offered themselves for it. Right. I think with the Lieutenant Governor bowing out of it, I think that gave us a stronger opportunity to be in the game. And
Democrats, you mean?
The Democrats, yeah. And because when he bowed out, he left some very weak people, in my opinion, behind him. And so we have an opportunity. We have to step up, find the right candidate, and go out and compete. And I think we're going to do that.
Senator, as a former member of the Black Caucus, the candidate the Black Caucus will support, or is that going to be some heavy lifting to decide who you'll back?
Well, certainly, we want to support the best candidate because I'm going to give you my prediction.
Please.
A Democrat will win the governorship in 2010. And we're going to win because the same economic conditions that led to President Barack Obama being elected president, we see here in the state of Georgia. We see high unemployment. We see a high foreclosure rate. We see high bankruptcies. We see business failures. And now it's a perfect storm to sweep out the Republicans and sweep in new leadership.
But won't it have to be the right kind of Democrat? It's going to have to be a conservative, almost a blue dog Democrat to make it, don't you think? I mean, can a middle-of-the-road or liberal Democrat win in this state? Because you're still going to need white folks. You're still going to need some Republicans. You're still going to need some conservatives.
Well, considering the track record of those that are holding office and those that have held this position for the past almost 8 years, I think we'd just have a good Democrat period in this office.
Are you guys leaning toward Thurman Baker? Is that an automatic because he's an African American?
I don't think it's an automatic. We have to look at all the candidates. There's a lot of good candidates out there. Certainly Thurman Baker is throwing his hat in the ring. I know my good friend, Commissioner Michael Thurman, is considering. I know of others that are considering. So we are going to go out and hopefully find and recruit the very best candidate that we can offer up.
Is Roy Barnes under your consideration too? Is he going to run?
Governor Barnes has made a lot of calls to a lot of members of our caucus, and I'm included in that number, and he's mentioned that an announcement from him is going to be forthcoming. I hear it's going to be sometime in May, no later than the 1st of June.
And that announcement about whether he's going to run or that he's going to run?
About whether or not he's going to run.
Oh, I heard that. I heard you, partner. Finally, have you heard anything about the gentleman was on the radio before you yesterday? I'm told that former DeKalb County CEO, Vernon Jones, is, in fact, on the radio yesterday. He was calling himself Governor Jones.
Okay, I didn't hear that.
But there's also the likelihood he might run as a black Republican. I'm just thinking, I mean, there's a lot out here in this gubernatorial campaign.
And that's correct. You know, and that's why it's premature for us to say what we're going to do. We have to find out who all of the players are going to be, and then make the right decision.
And when you say make the right, it'll be an endorsement by the Black Caucus?
No, we are not allowed to endorse, you know, because we are 501c3, so we're not allowed to endorse as a caucus. But as individuals, all of us represent, well, he has 3 times the size in his district, but, you know, all of us represent.
So it will be an individual decision, or will a caucus kind of say, here's what we like, and...
We're going to do what we can do to make sure that the right person is the next governor of this state.
That's political talk. That's what you do, right?
You cannot violate the 501c3.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Roger Bruce. Thank you so much.
Again, I'd like to thank you all for coming out to Newsmakers. We have had an evening talking to those African-American leaders that lead us in the state legislature. They represent the caucus, the black body of elected officials who collectively try to make decisions that positively affect our lives. What we are seeing, what we're hearing, is that we have a segment of those politicians, black politicians that is, on the Republican side of the fence that don't participate. That is something we should be talking about. That is something we should be admonishing them for. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out. This has been Newsmakers.